All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second work session of 10 of our fiscal 2023 budget cycle. We will be meeting today with the Department of Environmental Services, which covers a magnitude of things here in Arlington County. We are also so pleased to be joined today. Joan McIntyre is here on behalf of the Climate Change, Energy, and Environment Commission. The way we'll handle this is beginning with a presentation on the general fund. Then we're going to welcome Ms. McIntyre for comments and questions from board members. And then we're going to move to a presentation separately on stormwater, utilities, and the auto funds. And again, for time for questions as a way of breaking up this very large conversation. Yeah, that's right. A note for, I know my colleagues know this, but for anybody following along, all of these presentations, as well as the proposed budget items, are posted on our county's website under the board's agenda, as well as on the budget fiscal 2023 page. So with that, Mr. Manager, would you like to formally introduce our guest in the hot seat today? I
will, and I had a few introductory comments, so apologize for you having to turn around and look up here. So we're meeting today to review the proposed budget of the Department of Environmental Services. I wanted to talk a little bit about an item I highlighted in the manager's message. So last fall in budget guidance, the board directed me to prepare a budget that took a whole of government approach to achieving our climate change and sustainability goals as embodied in the community energy plan. So in drafting and revising and adopting the CEP, county staff, county board, we worked with everybody in the community, our residents, businesses, and nonprofits. And it's hard. We're doing the best we can to speak for the air, the water, the soil, and the natural environment we live in. So, and the hope always is that our children will get a better planet than what we inherited. And it's an urgent task. So, as you heard on Tuesday with our public safety agencies, one of the big challenges we have in delivering on that is hiring. And so I want to make sure that you focus on that. Mr. Emanuel will also lay out the broad range of efforts we're making in this area, but I wanted to just focus on 2 points for a minute. The $1 million CEP Action Fund that we put in the budget reflects my commitment to do what is needed to explore every possible approach to meeting the goals laid out by the board. We can't hope to have experts in our employment that can analyze every idea that we see. And this fund will ensure that anytime we need to do work, it will get done. In addition, I will ask for and find additional resources as needed in any of the areas needed for climate action and implementation. Second, also, while we have many opportunities to have a conversation over a whole of government approach to climate change, I want to suggest that the CEP represents, more importantly, a whole of community approach. If 95% of the impacts on the environment come from residents, businesses, and visitors, and not the government, how can we influence their behavior? This 95% figure must be top of mind, and keep that in mind when, for example, in a few months I bring to you proposals on subjects such as the missing middle, where we have a chance to embrace a variety of housing types that can help reduce the impact on the climate. And also next year when we complete our work on the Zero Waste Management Plan, and also when we and businesses in the county really try to permanently integrate the more environmentally friendly efforts we have to have our staff work remotely. And finally, as we look for unforeseen impacts of all our climate work, I was particularly struck by the example that Chief Pavlitz brought up 2 days ago about the challenges we might see with the proliferation of electric vehicles and how that might change the way we do things, for example, fight fires. So I'm excited about all our work in progress here, and on a range of other things, I really did want to give a specific shout out for our Vision Zero work, which has really come a long way. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Emanuel.
Thank you, Mr. Manager, Madam Chair, members of the board, and the community that we serve out there. So this year I'm back in hybrid mode. I have my Mike Moon, my COO, over here in person, and then out there virtually, many members of the staff if we need to go details of questions. But of course, the real department is out there, hard at work as we speak. Our team maintaining and operating infrastructure and facilities 24/7, including contractors providing services like transit and refuse. And of course, the staff leading the community to change the areas like the energy and the environment that Mr. Schwartz just talked about. So a lot of funds today. You've already introduced those. Let's get underway. Since we are covering a lot of ground today, I wanted to ground our budget requests in the context of our departmental mission and vision. This is kind of the big picture behind more than $315 million and $827.7 FTEs now, that are included in the proposed budgets across all DES funds. We'll cover most of those FTEs and most of that money today. Of course, new and replacement or upgrade infrastructure projects often get a lot of community attention because they're temporarily disruptive and that opportunity for change. But most of what we do in the budget is operations and maintenance and excellent customer service, and we try to do that in a really systematic, transformative, and sustainable way. So a few highlights, starting with energy, where we have been really busy, from the Community Energy Plan roadmap to converting vehicles to electric, to our new solar facility PPA projected to launch sometime this summer. It was going to be June, but we got a letter from DE and their contractor that has some little uncertainty on when that's going to start now. For stormwater, we finally had our second MS4 permit issued in FY21. By May, we'll have 2 high water detection systems installed. That took a while. We have a number of high-profile water infrastructure projects under construction now. For streets, we paved close to 70 lane miles, repaired over 9,000 sidewalk hazards, and completed 13 new traffic signal upgrades or installs. We've now installed a cumulative total of 173 battery backups at intersections, which is why it's a nice non-event when we lose power widespread. For solid waste, we continued our glass collection efforts with, to date, 7.9 million pounds collected. And we're also really excited that last September we kicked off our food scraps collection program. That was a really important milestone in our zero waste goal. For water, our new water and sewer rate structure went effective just this past January. And we're also focused on a number of critical capital projects like our regen solids master plans at the plant. For transit, while transit is continuing to face some real challenges with riderships, we have continued to provide on-time, reliable service for our community. Safety. We continue our culture of safety in DS with our lowest lost work days from safety incidents since we began tracking it about a decade ago. The board also adopted the Vision Zero thing that the manager just mentioned, action plan last May, and our team has already implemented 218 safety modifications in the roadway. Our facilities group continues to maintain our 2.5 million square foot of space in over 90 buildings throughout the pandemic. Because our people are our most important asset, we continue a relentless focus on safety from the goal zero thing that we set years ago. We look at all the stats. In FY21, our greatest accomplishments were lowest ever lost work days and the severity rate dropping. We need to keep the focus on further prevention activities, typically associated with slips, trips, and falls, and those related upstream fitness issues, which, those things temporarily just restrict duties, and that affects our mission. So, with all the competing priorities in DS, how did we approach the budget this year? Well, first, we simply aligned our budget with those very clear board policy priorities, following through on our commitments, like implementation of the CEP. In addition, there are targeted budget additions in transit and transportation, including implementation of the Metrobus 16M next spring, and our data-driven Vision Zero initiative, all while keeping pace with the very aggressive development activity and timelines. Next, we're increasing the use of data, both raw and spatial, to analyze programs through a racial equity lens. We have to do this all in a very competitive hiring environment. And the proposed compensation increases and job studies in this budget are greatly appreciated because we can't do the work without the right talent. So finally, we have to remain open and flexible about how we deliver services if revenues are down or community behaviors change for the long term, especially for areas like parking, commuter services, and transit. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on this slide because it's a really important part of the discussion, and I know that we'll want to discuss also with the C2E2 who's represented today. So, as the manager noted in his comments, the county's taken on a really expansive all-hands-on-deck approach to the whole of government in its climate energy planning programs from the very beginning. So, the CEP is like other elements of the comprehensive plan in that naturally it's implemented in an interdepartmental way. This graphic kind of shows how that flows from the board's adopted policy down through the manager and his deputies then typically to a lead coordinating or convening organization, and for this it's typically DES and the ERT. But which department, division, or bureau or bureaus pick up the workload really depends on the nature of the task. So, for example, we're trying to lead by example with conversion to EVs. And we're also trying to lead by example with electrification of county facilities and looking at electrification of transit buses. So a lot of that gets done right within DES because those functions are there. But in the case of electric vehicles, we're still coordinating with the using departments. So in the case of, I think Chief Poplitz mentioned on last Tuesday, for Fire Station 4, they're getting some electric vehicles, the charging stations, we've got to coordinate all that with him. So if we're really going to change behaviors and decisions in the private space, where 95% of the emissions happen, there's going to be naturally more teamwork with CPHD on redevelopment, AED, the CAPE team, housing partners, and so on. So our approach is to make it a priority across programs, a call to climate action within the government, and then within the community. So that means all departments and all functions in government, from purchasing to planning to playgrounds to the plan. So on the big things that require collective action, or that may require legislative or code changes, we're actively engaged regionally with state and federal and environmental leaders and stakeholders, as kind of shown on the left side of this diagram up here. So with the proposed increased funding, and as we move to more implementation, I'm committing to be more deliberative and formalize and broaden how we do this within the government, particularly at the higher level. So while the nature of our work and how we work together within departments is communicating interdepartmentally continuously and ad hoc as needed via many different means at many different levels, and we escalate issues when needed, when we have conflict, it's also very beneficial to be systematic and disciplined about that. So similar to what we did with the very successful interdepartmental work group on stormwater that was backed by the managers and deputies, I'm going to convene a quarterly climate, energy, and resilience review and update with appropriate department heads and divisions just to make sure we stay focused and that we also don't miss opportunities or important perspectives as we march toward our goals. So that's going to happen this summer, simultaneously with the expected hiring of several key vacancies on our air team. So this slide illustrates all the in-progress and completed air actions. We've reached milestones and continue work this year across the entire arc of the portfolio: buildings, renewables, and energy, government, and private sectors. So while we're doing a lot, we need to do more, and we also need to maintain that right balance. Just like any program, we got to have the right balance of planning, analysis, pilots, implementation, feedback. The goal is to hire, right now, kind of the way I'm thinking about it, our goal is to hire more doers of actually getting work done, and also influencers to get others to action. So this next slide will kind of serve to further illustrate an example. So while the implementation of the CEP occurs in the government and private spaces directly, this is kind of an example of a very successful program that is somewhat in a middle space and represents a type of creative partnership that will contribute to reaching our 2050 goal. So Helen Reineke-Wilt on our air team coordinates and facilitates a successful program with Solar United Neighbors, which makes it easy for private homeowners to access and leverage the buying power of a larger scale effort. And then our neighboring communities have also gotten on board with this, and now it's going regional. It used to be called Virginia Sun, but it's gone across the river. So this past year, 106 residents in and around Arlington purchased systems through the program, which is a 200% increase from previous years. And you can see the cumulative number of solar through the program on the left side there. On the right side, since 2018, the program expanded to include another option for EV chargers, and 20 electric chargers were installed this year, more than all the previous years combined. This, of course, is just a piece of what's happening within this program. There's a lot happening out there. We're a wealthy community. There's also a lot of private EV chargers out there, from Teslas to others. So basically, Both solar and EV chargers are starting to take off in the residential space, and that's an indicator of the market transformation to EVs. So while energy investments are embedded by consistent policy and practice across the budget, from affordable housing to transit-oriented development, some investment areas are more obvious. The proposed budget includes $4.4 million in energy investments to execute energy and climate resilient programs across departments with that whole of government approach. Let's go into these 4 areas in more detail. First, CEP execution. So for flexibility and execution in a very dynamic environment, the managers proposed that $1 million CEP action fund. Examples of what the projects that could fund include piloting new system electrification, small capital projects, additional consulting studies, or matching funds for federal and state grant opportunities, community energy investments. Next, an associate environmental management specialist is proposed in AIR to support the CEP roadmap implementation by simply providing more bandwidth. The manager also included $281,000 in consultant funds to do such things as optimizing on-site solar for government buildings, consultant support for PPAs and VPPA procurement, feasibility studies for public right-of-way EV charging, and tools for assessing government building energy efficiency upgrades. So a natural question and a good question, and part of the discussion we had with C2E2 on Monday night is, well, how do you know that this is enough? Do you have enough staff? And so forth. So my answer for now, of course, is yes. And I also know how the budget process works, and I know the board's priorities, and I'm certainly not going to be shy if we think we need more staff or consultants. And the $1 million Action Fund gives us that great flexibility to not be confined by the timing of an annual budget process. So to support vehicle electrification, an AIR project manager is added to manage the EV stations and solar panel installations. So a dedicated resource is right there in facilities will ensure we're able to meet the projected need and get things done on time. One-time funding is also being added to pay for the incremental cost of converting up to 53 new vehicles, almost all sedans, that are up for replacement, converting them to electric. The average delta for a sedan right now is about just a little over 5,000. $200,000 in PAYGO is set aside to fund the charging infrastructure at the county sites needed to support our new electric fleet. And then $125K for EV charging infrastructure for public use, county government sites, such as visitor spots or parking spots at Central Library. Proposed facility investments include proven things and areas where we're going to push ourselves to do more, including things like $350,000 for energy efficiency upgrades at county facilities. We'll select those projects based on energy performance, available technologies that meet the load demands. And we have a customized decision support tool for that. $140,000 for renewable energy assessments of at least 10 county government sites for on-site solar capacity readiness and what we would need to do for the structure. $250,000 for replacement of HVAC units with more energy and cost-efficient units. $420,000 for life cycle replacement of Fire Station 5's green roof. And $300,000 for window replacements at 3700 South 4 Mile Run. Additionally, the budget continues the effort that began in FY22 to replace gas-powered landscaping tools to electric. And the board previously allocated $24,000 in ARPA funding in FY23 to continue this effort. The household solid waste rate is going to fund $300,000 to fund the zero waste plan update. And last but not least, in transportation, $427,000 to fund conversion of Dominion Energy streetlights to LED. We've already completed the county-owned streetlights. Okay, so a lot on energy there. Appreciate the patience. Our department also continues other important efforts, continuing focus on DEI initiatives internally and then in our approach to delivering services. Our DEI committee has continued its really good work, forming subcommittees that are working on focus areas from internal recruitment practices to continuing DEI training for our DS workforce. Vision Zero and our concrete study illustrate how racial equity is becoming a routine part of our processes when we look at programmatic changes or adding funding. So we're getting more proficient, questioning ourselves, and analyzing data to make informed decisions. That data-driven approach helps to either confirm our approach is not exacerbating inequities or to indicate where we can do better. So let's look more deeply at Vision Zero and the sidewalks. As you know, our Vision Zero team is very organized, and the equity analysis will also be logical and organized as shown here. So after initial scoping and formulation of an interdisciplinary group of county staff, the team broke it into the 4 areas you see in here, 4 areas of analysis shown here, to include non-traditional things like, where are the originating zip codes of those involved in the accident? And what are the race, ethnicity, and age of those being transported for treatment? So there's a lot of research and analytical work ahead, and we'll take our analysis to the community conversations, engage them to explain our initial findings. And then we'll translate that to actions to enhance equity in the transportation safety, and of course, follow with that continuous evaluation to ensure our actions effectively reduce any disparate impacts. So this is just a raw sample of the type of deep dive analysis we plan to do in our Vision Zero equity analysis. So in this example, we overlaid community traffic related complaints, those are the orange dots, with the blue Title VI income census block groups. So where in the past, the traffic related complaints may have only been compared to population density, now we're also going to look at the Title VI data. Using that approach with multiple metrics helps us to better understand and better inform our decisions and strategies, and allows us to view the data basically through an equity lens. To be clear, we just started this. We haven't concluded anything yet. The equity analysis report is expected to be released at the end of this calendar year. The county recently completed a sidewalk condition survey that included 527 miles of sidewalk in the county. Our current concrete maintenance program is complaint-based, which has the potential to exacerbate inequities in the community because it's reactionary. The sidewalk condition assessment gathered thousands of data points for sidewalk condition, and we're currently analyzing the information. Although there are no preliminary indications of any widespread deficiencies or systemic disparities, the survey certainly did identify many opportunities for maintenance. We're still in the data cleansing mode, and we'll release that data as soon as we have completed the validation, and eventually that will lead to a condition index. We're kind of leading the nation in trying to do something like this and trying to get others on board with that. Okay, so let's move into the specifics of the general fund. By the numbers. Our expenditure budget is increasing 5%, reflecting a number of targeted additions to energy and transportation and the proposed salary increases. Revenues are also projected to slightly drop compared to last year's budget as some revenue sources continue to be impacted by the pandemic. It also reflects the removal of $1.65 million of NVTC funding that was used last year to support art operations for the current FY22 as we've been recovering from the pandemic. Staff count is increasing by 8.25 FTEs, reflective of a number of those targeted additions to our budget, including the 2 positions for the air team I already mentioned. Let's go into more details. So our ridership chart here shows the dramatic drop in March 2020, which then recovered somewhat after April. Ridership in FY22 has shown modest recovery, trending overall 26% above last fiscal year. However, we have ways to go to recover. If you look at the most recent data there on that orange line, Omicron and the delayed return to office really continue to make this year challenging. Overall, through January, we're about 40% of our budgeted revenue, when we would hope to be obviously at 50%. Overall, we're cautiously optimistic, but uncertain on the timing and that slope of recovery for these revenue sources in FY23. Because commuting patterns and the future of telework have still not normalized, we've lowered our budgeted revenues in FY23 to kind of reflect a slower recovery. Instead, it reflects kind of a modest increase based on current actuals. We believe those estimates are conservative and, of course, subject to change. It's just an unpredictable time. There are a number of targeted budget adds in transportation funded by General Fund and TCF. And while TCF is later briefing, it just makes sense to talk about the positions here. So we've added a Vision Zero program manager to manage that new body of work, a facilities project specialist is added to our facility design and construction group to manage the large, high-priority, high-dollar transit projects, including Ballston West and Crystal City East entry projects. Then on the right side there, funded from the Transportation Capital Fund, as the Ballston multimodal project nears completion, we need to maintain those assets. We're adding $38,000 to clean and repair this new asset and operations. We've added a quarter of an FTE in the Solid Waste Bureau to fund temporary employee hours to increase shelter cleaning frequency along the Pike and the Transitway. So we're going to do power washes 4 times a year instead of twice a year. We're expanding the frequency of existing ART routes 41 and 45 to maintain service levels due to that route change from WMATA, which I'll go through on the next slide. Lastly, we'll be funding $300,000 from TCF to pay for 1 fiscal quarter of WMATA's 16M line. In FY24, we anticipate that will be funded by a regional grant. So here on the map, it lays it out a little more clearly what's happening on the west end of the Pike. In spring 23, the second phase of premium transit service is planned to be implemented. The Metrobus 16M line, shown there in the green, will be the new added service, which will replace the 16 GH and K. It'll provide that high-frequency services connecting Skyline, Columbia Pike, Pentagon City, and Crystal City. So we're working through with WMATA's budgeting process for the 16M, since it will be a regional route serving Fairfax County and Arlington that also requires support from them as a regional partner. At the same time, we'll be increasing ART service on the 41 and the 45, shown there in the gold or yellow, to ensure that neighborhood maintains its existing service levels. That's going to replace the service that was previously served from Metro 16G. So we recently briefed this. The service enhancement and change in status was greatly endorsed and supported by the Columbia Pike Partnership. As approved by the board last fall with ARPA funds, we are moving ahead with the implementation of our no-fare pilots. The APS student no-fare pilot launched in February, and it's targeted at students who have faced challenges with the yellow bus services or extended walk zones during the pandemic. We work carefully with schools to kind of target the choice schools and then the high schools. We're also promoting our online writer tools so the students understand how easy it is to find options that work for them. So the picture in the upper right there shows, this is from February 8th, when about 37 students were boarding an ART bus outside Kenmore Middle School. With data from the pilot, we'll be likely coming back to the board in the fall with recommendations for future expansion. I literally just saw some preliminary data this morning. It was great to see the, the hundreds of rides that the kids are already taking. And we'll provide updates to the board when we got some more data. But the great news is we've got it set up so the data is being collected and analyzed right away. On the low-income resident no-fare pilot, we're working with DHS. We've identified 7,200 low-income residents eligible to participate in the no-fare pilot that are currently enrolled in the SNAP and TANF programs. They'll receive a smart trip cards loaded with approximately $150, and that seeks to onboard new users for the next 18 months, and we'll gauge interest in our no-fare programs and identify which residents need the transportation services the most. So we're working with DHS, and this morning's update is that the distribution starts next week. Lastly, there were a few additional targeted budget adds across the department where the lines of business indicated important needs. With Amazon and related development, we are in robust construction phase. So the proposed budget includes a construction management specialist and a permit processing specialist, both funded by the CPHD Development Fund. The development pipeline includes roughly 7.5 million square feet of private construction underway and another 5 million expected to start by the end of this year. So these positions are simply needed to keep up with demand. Also, to meet that demand, we're trying to be smart and flexible about how we deploy our staff to meet peak needs. So this budget includes a really small amount, but a new cross-training incentive for construction management specialists to complete rigorous coursework and certifications in 2 different disciplines, both stormwater and infrastructure. The cost of the program will cover within our existing budget. It simply provides a $1,000 gross for bonus for employees who have completed. The proposed budget also includes converting 2 limited-term technology positions to permanent. Work in that area is always increasing and is not going away. We will continue to fund with salary savings that important work that directly supports the operating units. So in operations, we have 2 pieces of heavy equipment, a rock crusher and a dirt shaker. They're not cheap, at $750,000 and $400,000 a piece, respectively. They're at their end of their useful lives and in need of replacement. So utilities is paying for 70% of the replacement, and the amount shown here is the 30% general fund contribution. In facilities engineering, we're adding an additional facilities project specialist to oversee this building, the Bosman Government Center. We're also adding some one-time funding to digitize real estate files, which is particularly important with the shift to so much teleworking. So a quick look at some of our larger revenue sources in the general fund. We hit art revenue on the earlier slide. Parking meter revenue has seen steady recovery, and while we aren't back up to the pre-pandemic revenue levels of approximately $12 million annually, we are expecting revenue to increase in '23. We're projecting the $10.4 million. Commuter store fees come from commissions at our commuter stores and online sales. Not surprisingly, since transit ridership is down, so are the commission fees. So to address that revenue shortfall, we have reduced planning expenditures accordingly with reduced marketing and outreach events and reduced contractor support. This is really a balancing act because we're trying to bring transit ridership back, but we got to deal with the reality of how we're doing on the commissions and how much we're coming in with revenue. We'll try to figure out where that new normal lands. Finally, we increased the base budget for our permit and right-of-way fees by over $900,000 to align with the recent trends and expected continued robust construction pipeline. Plus, the fees themselves were increased by an inflationary adjustment of 4% to cover salary and contractual increases. This next slide shows parking meter revenue and how we're recovering, and the orange line illustrates where we are right now. Parking obviously dropped the pandemic, although not quite as significantly as other sources. We're about 78% of pre-pandemic revenues, and we're optimistic about recovering FY23. Again, you see the orange line in there, that dip reflected the Omicron dip, and maybe some snow and cold weather. Next, the household solid waste rate. That's a fee that's 100% cost recovery, is proposed to decrease by $10.72 down to $307.89. That brings the customer revenue then down from $10.6 million down to $10.2 million. And the reason we can do that is because we have offsetting contractual revenue increases in recycled materials based on the market, which offsets the cost of our disposal contracts. We also implemented the food scraps program, and FY23 will mark the first full budget year with the program. Okay, that's the quick run through of the general fund. And so I'll get out of the chair and
Great.
give Joan the seat.
McIntyre, welcome. Nice to see you.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Just want to to set context, remind the county board that on Monday, the UN's IPCC issued its latest report, warning of a world on the brink. The urgency and escalating toll of climate change have never been clearer, it says. Any further delay will force humanity to miss the brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable and sustainable future for all. Arlington will not be immune and has not been immune to the impact of climate change, whether it's on our health and well-being, property damage, or disruptions of economic activity. We've experienced these disruptions already through storms and flooding, and it's going to hit the most vulnerable of our populations. So, and then climate experts are saying is that in order to move away from the brink and avoid the worst consequences, we have to cut carbon emissions by 50% by 2030. This means basically rapidly moving away from fossil fuels. So within that context, I'd say the proposed budget really does not adequately reflect the urgency of the situation that we're facing, or even that a full commitment to meeting the county's goal of carbon neutrality. We certainly appreciate the greater attention that's being given to the environment and to climate change that's in the budget. I mean, for the first time ever, I think it's been recognized as a priority for the county government. And I think much of that is attributed to the county board and their commitment to pursuing action on climate change. We're seeing the movement towards EV vehicles and solar panels on rooftops is a very positive direction. The creation of the $1 million CEP fund will offer some flexibility for funding, although we'd like to see a lot more criteria about how that funding would be spent. And then finally, the addition of one position directly to the air team and then another position to support the EV chargers and solar rooftops is, again, giving some additional capacity to deal with these efforts. Nevertheless, looking at the proposed budget for the air team, which really has been the focal point for implementation of the county's climate action and energy commitments, their budget is going to $2.3 million, which is a 41% increase. However, when you look back to where it was at $2 million in FY18 and given inflation and account, that really isn't much of an increase. That really isn't an increase at all, and really doesn't really reflect, I think, the urgency. Of course, recognizing that in many cases, some of the expenditures are going to be spread throughout the government. More importantly, we don't think that the county budget and the guidance really reflects the guidance that the county board offered in terms of adopting a whole of government approach. It's unclear whether the additional expenditures are going to, it doesn't really give a clear picture of how the county plans to achieve the goals. In some cases, it's really looking at, expanding a little bit on what current processes are in our place. They are talking about, a senior level coordinating group that will meet quarterly, but there's no information on staffing and budget projections, as was called for by the county. We don't see any real, a lot of details in terms of what the communication policies might be, what the processes would be for dealing with conflicts between different priorities within the county. And about how they're fully integrating sustainability within, and then most important, what we still see as a glaring defect is the lack of any real true expertise and leadership on climate and other environmental issues at the very senior level of the government. Everyone's doing their job, but it's not no one's job at the senior level to be a climate leader, or to have the expertise that this very complex issue requires. And then, so again, as we've actually requested several times in the past, is that we really do think that the county should establish a senior level chief climate change and sustainability officer. Such a position has really become the best practice on government and businesses with successful climate and sustainability efforts, including many of our peers. This approach has become common practice because an all-of-government approach requires leadership from the top, not from the middle. We're also very concerned about the apparent unwillingness of the county government to commit to electrification of county operations, particularly for buildings. Decisions that extend reliance on natural gas digs us even deeper into the hole. The proposed budget, in fact, refers to electrification as an emerging technology. It is not. It suggests that maybe it would be appropriate for pilots on facilities that are not essential to government operations. The budget also mentions HVAC updates that are included without any little detail, but the focus there is on energy efficiency, with no mention of whether or not these systems are natural gas and whether there's plans to move them to electric systems. Again, the more we continue to rely on natural gas, the more we're continuing to burn fossil fuels. But if as we clean up the electric system, then once the county government operation meets its goal of 100% renewable electricity, these will truly be decarbonized operations. So it is pretty quickly important. It is feasible, and we think the county really needs to start to get out of its comfort zone to consult with the appropriate experts and look at the ways of how they can actually electrify systems. Business as usual really isn't an option anymore. And the county government needs to get clear guidance requiring electrification when updating systems unless no alternatives are feasible, similar to the guidance that the county board gave on electric vehicles last year. And finally, as Mr. Emanuel had mentioned, that this really is a whole of community approach. 96% of carbon emissions in the county come from the private sector, and the budget at this point really doesn't have much in it that really is outward facing. This is, again, it's complex, it's confusing. A lot of education, information, assistance is going to be needed in order to really help move the community in the direction it really needs to go. And that could include incentives as well. We really urge the county board to add additional resources into the budget in order to promote this outward-facing education and education of the community. Components could be maybe a one-stop shop, similar to the car-free diet, where it would be a good venue for people to go and get the information and get access to the resources that they might need, or at least it's more linking to the resources, not necessarily providing it directly. Certainly a robust public education engagement, reaching out to the community members where they are, letting them know what they need to know. I think a lot of people want to do the right thing. They often just don't know what the right thing to do is. This is kind of a moving and constantly changing situation. And also, I think a key part of this effort really needs to be programs directly targeted at low to moderate income housing and households so that they can benefit from transition to both more energy efficient buildings, electric systems, as well as solar and rooftops, so they're really not left out. And finally, it will require a continual approach that the county has been doing in terms of identifying funding, whether it's at the state or local level, establishment of a green bank, or community choice aggregation. All things that have been looked at and viewed on, but that's going to need continued time and attention because obviously the county's own resources aren't sufficient for the needs that will be needed to make the investments to make these changes. I know the county board members really recognize the urgency of the climate crisis and are committed to taking actions that matches the scope of the challenge. So let's make this budget, as well as the upcoming CIP, reflect the urgency. And this is, the future of our children and our community are at stake.
Thank you so much,
you.
Ms. McIntyre. We appreciate your comments as well as your service.
Thank you.
Colleagues, I think it probably makes sense to try to do this sort of thematically. Why don't we begin with conversation and question about the AIR program and the sustainability efforts in this budget or generally, then move to transportation, and then we'll open the floor for conversations and questions about other general fund operations of DES before we then turn it back to Mr. Emanuel to move through the other funds. So let's begin with a round of questions on sustainability. And I think I saw Mr. Karantonis' light first, so we'll start with you.
Yeah. So we are in a constant conversation about this whole government approach, and the reason is because we recognize it's not just the size of the challenge, it's the realization it's a complex challenge that includes everybody, right? And actually in your slide number, I think 6, you have this organogram-like explanation of, who communicates with whom and what connects with whom. So the question for me is, how can we and the community, who is at the end accountable for reporting how we are doing? So more or less, we have to be reducing our emissions at a pace of 7% or so every year. This is a very, very ambitious goal. And right now, I don't know if we can reach that goal at all. So who would be facing the county board or facing the community in general and say, look, this is where we are, this is what we do, this is what else we can do. I was talking with our counterpart in our sister city in Aachen, who's a mayor, she's with the Green Party, and she was telling me, the problem is most of our departments don't really know where to go. They know, they have the general plans, they implement these plans, but then we have somebody who in the mayor's office, there are 2 or 3 people who are functioning as a central place, a central resource for all departments. They ask, is this measure, is this work, is this implementation, is this job that we want to do, can we do it even better in terms of reducing emissions? Can we report that we are doing the best we can? And that goes through procurement, goes through every department, even DHS would ask. So in this big capsule that is the county manager's office and DES director, how is this accountability going to work? Who is there, except for you?
Well, I think it's really a big team. We have the air team, which Dimitra leads very capably, and we have Mike, we have me, and we have all the support staff that goes with it, and we have the manager's office. So, maybe Mr. Schwartz would want to jump in a little bit here as well, but the accountability, the way we're organizing the county government is in departments currently. And the manager tasks us as appropriate, typically as a lead in DES and the air team, and then we pull in the necessary people. And I'm speaking for myself here, but I don't find that to be an obstacle or problem because of the relationships that I forge with my fellow department directors. It's not just like when we meet as a leadership team, we meet as one-on-one. So if I got a tough issue, I got to work with Claude Williamson and the CPHD, then that's when we have regularly scheduled one-on-ones, or similar with Jane from Parks. So I'm talking to the fire chief all the time. So it's through those relationships that we get to the tough issues. And when we have a challenge, then we escalate them to the manager or our deputy county managers. So I don't view that as an obstacle. And the manager is responsible for the whole county government, and he tasks us to do things that we need to do, including this. So I don't. So the accountability kind of goes, typically to the lead, but if someone else is playing a really important supporting role, then the accountability goes to them. And the dynamic is we hold each other accountable. That's somewhat simplistic, but that's kind of how I view it. It's largely, it's a lot of based on candid relationship and trust that we've formed with each other to get to hard and difficult issues.
Yeah, I don't doubt that. I mean, in the classic model of division of labor, I get that. There are synergies, and we have a job. We try to do that. We need the inputs and the collaboration synergies from others. That's okay. Problem is that climate policy and climate protection and climate adaptation is exceptionally complex. This is a job that everybody has to perform, and sometimes way beyond the definition of task of a department in order to make it happen. And this is behind the general discussion whether we need a new restructuring of leadership specifically for climate adaptation and response, because it's a different type of task than the classic repertoire of tasks that we have in our. So I just wanted to ask you this, and then how much of this function would the environmental management specialist that you want to add to the air team take on? What would be exactly the
Well,
task
environmental
definition?
management specialist, I mean, I'll leave that up to Demetra McBride, who's leading that group, of how she tasks and divide things amongst the various projects and initiatives over time. So for example, if we're working community choice aggregation, then she might look in the, someone who's got expertise in that for the next hiring of that person, if that's going to be her next priority, for example. And then typically, we will not just rely on our own in-house or people that we hire. We often hire the consultant support and the best people that we can find in that particular area of expertise that we need to cover an issue. So it's contractors, it's staff, but, she's like, you're responsible for this particular area as the lead, but then the reporting goes all the way up, through Mike and me and onto the manager. So.
Okay. I need to think through that.
Yeah, and Mr. Karunas, if I could just, it is because I respect the magnitude of this philosophical conversation, which I think is going to be one of the big debates of our budget, that I might suggest that we maintain our focus, at least for the work sessions, on sort of more of the factual questions that we can circulate and items for follow-up. And I think this is going to be a major area of dialogue. It's also not one that we're going to resolve today. So I think it may make sense to sort of move on to more of the factual conversations that can be surfaced. Not to diminish it, actually, but out of respect for the importance of that broader dialogue.
Oh, sure. I just wanted to kickstart that, and this is a question that has to be addressed somehow in the
Correct.
budget or otherwise.
Yeah.
So that's something that is inside the scope.
Thank you. Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, I actually had a specific question about this issue. Thank you. And I think you're right. We're going to have to be talking about this. I will just say from the outset, I like the concept of the roadmap. I like the concept of having a whole structure that makes it happen, not just one person. And I'm, for one, kind of willing to probably give it a try. Question, though, I think an annual report is supposed to happen with this roadmap, an annual report to the board. When will the first one be? And it seems to me the sooner the better, because I would love to have an annual report that you give to us that kind of sets a baseline. And you report on all of the things that then we can expect to report on in another year. And that I'd like that sooner than later. So you're really, the first report is kind of like where we are now. And then the next one will be the progress that you've made about a year later. So I've told you what I want to hear. But if you can answer the question.
Yeah,
when
we
you
will
plan
get
to
you
do
an
it.
annual report. Let me get back to you on the exact timing of that first one. As I mentioned, didn't dwell on it too much, but we are a little bit short-staffed right now. We had some key vacancies, and we just lost another staff member to Parks, which stays within the family of the county government, which is great. But we're really, and we got some great people that we're interviewing right now to bring those on. So let me get back to you on when we think we can get you that, because we want to give you the quality product for the first
Right.
report, obviously, and then to build on that.
Yeah.
Reporting is super important. Showing progress is super important. But as Mr. Karantonis noted, it is crazily complex. And how often we update the model itself, because it is so complex, is a time-consuming activity by itself. And so choosing the right frequency so that we can motivate people and show progress and have dashboard is important. But, we're not going, it's not like a real-time model type of thing that's going to be built and shown and
Right.
fed and.
Right, so that's going to be the proof of the pudding if this concept works.
Yes.
So that would be great. I have one more quick question on this sort of area, and then I've got transportation for later. And that is a more even specific one on the concrete study. They make concrete now that absorbs CO2. I'm sure you're aware of that. And there are some places using it. I gather it's expensive. I'm sure there's some issues with it. But is that included in the scope, or might it be included? Because if we could start replacing the concrete that we're using for things with concrete that actually absorbs CO2, that would seem to be a good thing.
Well, we're working with low-carbon cement that goes into the concrete as part of our, looking to incorporate it into our specifications for the concrete that we do in a lot of different projects, and making sure that it meets the quality standards and specifications of strength, while still being a lower carbon input into the construction process.
Yeah, my understanding is there's something that actually pulls it out of the atmosphere and absorbs it. I mean, I saw it when
You may have knowledge beyond me on that, but we can get back to you on that.
You can get back
as
to me
well.
on that. That's fine. It would be, and if you're going to do a study, maybe if you can toss that into
Right.
the study. That's it. All right, thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
Mr. DeFerenti.
The first question I have is, both you, Mr. Manager, as well as you, Mr. Emanuel, had talked about the 95% of our energy usage that is community-based. And we're working on our 4% goal for 2025, or 5%, which is county operations. And then the other 95% of our energy usage is a community. And so I'm wondering, it doesn't appear that the 2 additional positions actually address that 95%. And it's not I'm not asking it to be, I just think the next step, like, it would be, and I'm not saying we don't put resources, we do in air towards community engagement, but, there's way more hybrids than there are solar roofs, and hybrids are okay, but we need electric vehicles now. And so, for example, I'm thinking of putting solar on our house, but I've been to the county website, and I don't know enough to feel confident enough to know all the consequences, financial, and how to budget it out. So what is it possible that some community engagement, like a one-stop shop, which was the end of Ms. McIntyre's comments, it doesn't quite yet feel as though that piece of what we have to do at a rate of 8% per year is there's a ton of work, and I want to acknowledge that, these slides, there's a ton of work that's happened, but I don't know that I feel like yet that structural change of community engagement that we need to do, is that covered already in our budget, or is there a question over the coming weeks as to whether additional resources might be appropriate there?
Okay, well, I really appreciate that feedback and that thought, focused more on the outward community, and I think we will get back to you on that. Again, we have a very capable community engagement team across a lot of programs. I think that we partner pretty well with the manager's office, and we're also blessed that Jessica Baxter, who was in DES, is now on the CAPE team. So I think we can get a positive partnership going there to maximize the resources we have. And then if we decide that we need more resources, that'll be a separate conversation.
I did want to add, I hate to interrupt you. I want to just sit up here and just hang out. But a couple of things, which is that Brian and Helfer, right now, we're in the process of hiring 3 additional staff in the manager's office. And the focus of one of those hires will be to bring some more, no pun intended, energy to this area. And also another thing, and I'm glad you brought up, I know that when Ms. Garvey was chair of the board, I spent a lot of time having a conversation with her because I was looking at putting solar panels on my house. And we did a little bit of a test run on the county website, and there were some things that were lacking. I think we've made improvements on that. And also we have our regional partners, NVRC, which really has a great program. And another thing, which I think that we need to have some more conversation on, which we've looked at a little bit on the model of the Complete Count Committee and the Complete Vaccination Committee. And what we're looking to do with EPAC is to really, I'd like to work with C2E2 and make them also part of that communication process to the community, because they are necessarily part of the community, and make them, the individuals of that group, also a resource that could help as navigators. So
That helps, and that's great to know. I sometimes feel, having been in an advocacy role, I sometimes feel as though the marriage of subject matter expert and communications is key, and so I could envision that'll be a follow-up area, at least that I'd like to pursue over the coming weeks, because some of it is a CAPE function, and some of it might be like, a website function, and someone who is enough subject matter deep that they can help these folks and say, there's too much shade, you can't get it, or and that could apply to residential, could apply to a little bit to transportation. So thanks.
Thanks, Mr. DeFranti. Under critical measures on the budget, this is page 405 for the air team. There's a note that the percentage of government operations electricity consumption using renewable electricity will actually jump from 18% this current fiscal year to 100%, which would be encouraging because that puts us a couple years ahead of schedule. I think we're trying to get to 2025. But I know at the time we adopted the community energy plan, there was some conversation about, how much we would reach that goal by purchasing offsets versus, for example, the true gold standard of diminishing our energy consumption. Is there anything you can do to help us kind of break out that 100% goal, which is great to see, in terms of how we're achieving? And I know we're achieving something like 80%, right, with that partnership with Amazon to purchase the offsite renewable electricity. But is there more to be said about, are we reducing the amount of electricity consumption, thus making it easier to get to 100% of it? What are the other sources beyond, that 20% after the joint procurement with Amazon? Any other insight you can shed into that goal?
Well, I think you hit on the big one is the deal with Amazon and making that happen, and then we will purchase as necessary green power to fill that remaining gap. But I think we actually get more than 80% on that. We'll get to you on some more details on that.
Okay.
And as I mentioned, that's a little bit delayed right now.
Got it. And so that we really anticipate that is out of the purchase of green power to fill that remaining gap rather than the diminished use of electricity.
We certainly, through our efficiency efforts, also seek to reduce that. But this is what, back to the complex nature that Mr. Carantonis mentioned. If we do building electrification, we're of course going to drive up our electrical consumption. So we have to, do all that math.
Yeah.
So the actual, the total amount of electricity, then we may be driving that back up, but then try to maintain that at 100% renewables.
Sure. Although isn't the goal, forgive me, this is not my area of expertise, to diminish the amount of energy required, period, in the building, right?
Sure.
And then shift the energy that is required to renewable sources.
Exactly.
So I think hopefully with electrification, that also means diminished use of energy altogether.
Right.
Okay, Mr. Dorsey, thank you, and patient.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. So as we sort of think about the whole of government approach and the resourcing of the AIR team, broadly speaking, we're spending around $2 million for the AIR program, but I recognize that with the way you portrayed the framework, it's not just within the AIR team that this responsibility lives. So it's not necessarily illustrative to just look at the ongoing growth in that department's budget or that agency's budget. So I want to focus more on what I would desire out of a whole of government approach, and if you can match that with your assessment of whether or not we have enough resources within your sphere of influence to achieve it. So, and just going to give a couple of illustrative examples. Hazard mitigation planning, which I presume is the responsibility of Dr. Miller, but is there a way for you to be involved in that work so that we're reaching the highest level of climate and sustainability outcomes? Do you have someone, is that someone's responsibility to engage with that effort?
Yes, we do that, both at my level and with Dimitri's level. We certainly did a lot of that when we were doing a lot of our stormwater work with Aaron and his team.
Okay. So in the event that there is conflict, you mentioned earlier that relationships have kind of been the way that those things are resolved. And that's great to hear. I'm glad that we have great relationships among leaders in our organization. That also scares me a little bit because relationships are not a way to deliver outcomes as those actors change. So is there a structure that sort of allows for anytime there are conflicts, disagreements, or just a differentiation in priorities for there to be someone who calls the question, or is that the thing that elevates up to the county manager?
Yeah, we escalate when we need to. I mean, I routinely meet with my deputy county manager, Michelle Cowan, on a weekly basis. And then that's when we get into those tough issues and talk strategies and when and how we want to escalate something to the manager. I also have that direct line to Mark as well.
Great. And as it relates to residential construction specifically, or residential buildings specifically, a quarter of our greenhouse gas emissions. Mostly our work historically has been in solar. We've done a lot of work, great outcomes in increasing solar arrays in residential buildings. What about some of the other things that we could be doing on the residential side? Are we well staffed enough to deliver on incentive programs for retrofits, capturing those people who don't have the capacity and wherewithal to already be committed to home renovations who can take advantage of Green Home Choice and those resources? How are we dealing with the rest of it?
So I think in the residential space where, and maybe I will turn it over to Mitra for a little bit more on this one after I give an initial answer. In the residential space, Helen is already there, I mentioned, on the solar program. We have the Green Home Choice that she runs. I think that we could do more there, and I think that's a likely target area for a person that we would hire. Because it's outreach focused. I think we, as part of that process though, and you kind of touched on it, we will come back to the board through the manager about where we are on incentive programs and how and when is what is appropriate. Part of the challenge is in Virginia, Dominion doesn't have a great incentive program, right? So then within the legal construct that we have in our principles and priorities to achieve our goals, what type of incentive program is appropriate at what level? So I think that's something we could certainly come back to the board on to consider as a policy and funding issue.
Thank you. And if you wanted to have someone else opine, that's fine. If not, that's good for me.
There's more. Okay.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Karantonis with another round of questions, and then Mr. DeFerranti, I think, unless you had more on sustainability.
Oh, no, I'm on
Yeah,
the.
we'll get to transportation next. I'm going to start with you on transportation. How about that? Let's do it. Great. Mr. Karantonis.
That will be a short one. I'm trying to understand better what is exactly the plan on EV charging stations in public use government sites. So I actually appreciate them where they are. They are currently an amazing resource. It's also an equity thing because it makes this charging accessible to people who may not have, may not live in a single-family home and need that, etc. So $125,000 seems to me a small amount and I've seen that in recent sites, like for example down in Longbridge, we put like four, and we are already getting some feedback on the accessibility of that and whether it works. So what's exactly the goal here? How do we want to increase the availability in places where we know that people can go and charge easily?
I don't have a specific goal number for you on the number on how many over what time, and that's something we can get more details on. But the goal is to generally, if I give a broad goal, is to keep up with demand or keep up or stay ahead of the demand, right? And to gain enough knowledge. And I think we can do some partnership things with vehicle registration and know what the trends are and try to stay ahead of that, right? So use the data to our knowledge and stay ahead of that. I think a lot of people will try to do that charging at home, obviously. A lot of it will depend also on what we do with outreach to places like AOBA, apartment owners of buildings, what we encourage them to do to meet the demands within those private spaces. So, because it's best, where a person is overnight so they can do a slow charge and it's efficient and it's off peak. And so, Mr. Moon and I were just discussing this morning, that one of the things we might want to advocate for with BEPCA is a time of use rates. And to the extent that we can get time of use rates for EV charging, I think there could be a good win-win for everyone. So that we get lower pricing for electricity on off-peak. Dominion wins because they level out their load. We win because we get lower rates at night, is typically when they are.
Thank you.
Mr. DeFerranti.
I think that there's a lot of progress, and I hope you can accept, I would share that I think that this budget draft includes a lot of steps forward. I still think we got a structural change is what we need in Arlington, or we're not going to make 2035. I think Ms. McIntyre's recited, I believe, the science that you just cited from last week. So my question, I guess, is for the manager, and I appreciate the chairs, but I want to frame up the issue, and the question is, did you think of a chief sustainability officer? And if not, just share, it's okay. I get the whole of government. That wasn't in our budget direction. My question is, why do you think that's not an additional step, given the emerging science and given the fact that we've got a governor who is not committed to doing anything on climate change?
So your question was whether I considered a chief sustainability officer. I did consider it. The incremental investment of adding another person into the manager's office, well, let me just say, if it's a $250,000, probably $300,000, that money, to my mind, was better spent with trying to have, as Greg put it, have the doers that we need. We can't fill the slots we have right now. And I know that as appealing as it may be to some people to have a chief sustainability officer, and I don't question that appeal, we need people to carry through on the 120-page CEP plan that this board hopefully will adopt shortly. And, you know, this is partially informed by my view of how you go about doing things in government, and referring to what Mr. Dorsey said, you can't necessarily rely on having good people in good places all the time, and that isn't what always happens. But all the issues that we deal with in the government, whether it's sustainability, whether it's hunger, whether it's mental health issues, whether it's how we approach policing, these are all in many ways, extremely, incredibly important issues. In my tenure in the county in 16 years, the number of times I've had people come to me and ask for a chief blank officer, fill in the blank, has been multiple times. And, you know, I think that we have an obligation to deliver a whole range of services and follow the board's priorities. And it's a very, I don't want to say it's very complicated, but it is very complicated. And those decisions at the end of the day rest with me. It's my decision. And, you know, I want to go down to Independence, Missouri and borrow Harry Truman's little plate and put it on my desk. The buck stops with me. I have to deliver on those things you've said. And if the point is to have someone in my office who will talk into my ear more frequently about that, well, that might be helpful. I'd much rather have that person doing the work the board has adopted and that I've laid out.
Thank you. I know it wasn't an easy question. My thought is both and I think there are two defining challenges of our time. And the Chief Race and Equity Officer, I care about hunger, but I think that I will be thinking that we need to consider seriously both and doers, and because we've talked about the need for ideas that can make change, and that's sort of the thinking. I appreciate it, Mr. Manager and Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. So I do want to make sure we are focused on something that, I'm just looking at the number, I believe drives over a third of emissions, which is transportation. I think sometimes we focus on air, like that's the only place that we're focused on sustainability on the budget. I'd actually argue that transportation is probably, and especially getting people out of single occupancy vehicles, is one of the most important ways we're actually addressing this. So Ms. Garvey, we'll start with you, and I've got some questions myself, so thank you.
I have two. You can decide after the first one if I get to get them both at once. We'll see. And they're very different. First, Mr. Manuel, how do you pick where to put the accessibility station? I know we're making more and more of our bus stations accessible, so people who are mobility challenged can use our system. How do we decide where to do that? I may have asked this before and gotten the answer, but I have forgotten.
I'll turn it over to Dennis Leach after I give you the initial answer. So basically, we've surveyed them all. And we try to line up with what other things we're doing, like if we've got a street project going on there, we certainly want to weigh that into it at the same time, because it may be, hold off because there's a project coming a year later. And then we just systematically go after it. I don't have at the tip of my tongue of the progress we made, but we've made steady progress on those. I think we also consider the ridership levels, obviously, because we want to have the biggest bang for the buck. And we're, the great thing about being a big government but it's small enough is that if there's a special request from someone that we know or has a special need, then that's going to obviously go straight to our priority.
That's my question. Are we looking at, because we have a specific number of people who need to use Metro Access, and if we know that, okay, good. was also sort of the answer I wanted to hear. Thank you. All right, I get another one. All right, thank you. So on the pilot for students, and I'm, fine on the JCTC and following that a bit, and I'm glad that we're moving forward with it, and students are using it, which is great. What happens, so the students get loaded cards. What happens if they lose the card?
I'm pretty sure that we would issue them another one.
And the money on the other loaded card gets removed and?
We will get back to you on the details of that.
They
because-
deactivate it.
Yeah, do you?
They can be
On a phone, friend.
deactivated.
Excuse me? All right, because one of the things I'm struck by listening to it is how complex it is having to give students cards and people being straight and which student can have. It feels very complex, and I guess my last question, which is part of this, is it possible to just give cards out to students and and every time they use it clicks and gets paid another way? You see what I'm saying? So like when I go, that you don't have to load the card. I suspect that means a whole new payment fare system. In fact, I'm sure it does. But I wonder if that's possible. It just feels like that would be much better. Then we'd know who's using it, where they're using it, when they're using it, and if they get a card and they don't use it, it doesn't matter. Because some students are getting it and apparently not using it. Some of them are using it a lot. And then some students would like to use it and don't have cards. So there's a lot to still work out. I'm glad we've started on it.
Yes, and as, we'll share that, the details and the feedback that we're getting from the data that we have. And just know that some of the backbone, because of the integration of art with Metro Bus, we rely on kind of the Metro Bus technology as the underlying, because it all has to work together. And so whatever we do, it then has to go back and work with that. But yeah, that was one of the questions I had with our team is, is there a way we can just give like a student ID way to scan in?
Yeah,
and
they
it's
just walk through.
And then it happens on the back end somehow.
Yeah.
I don't think we're there yet with the technology, but that may be something that we can push with Metro
That would
Bus
be
in the
great. Or
future.
just they show it and the driver just lets them on.
But then you don't capture the data. And so
Well,
that's
maybe the
sweet-
driver just does a little click thing. Anyway, I'm getting way into the weeds, out of my expertise, but anyway, I am following it. I'm glad we're doing it, and thank you. And any more information, I'd be appreciated. And I know we need to get more data. Thank you.
All right.
I'd like to follow up actually on where Ms. Garvey left off. It's no secret, I think we all expressed our disappointment at how few students relatively this pilot is reaching. It's about, given the numbers here, it's about 9% of APS students, less than 9% of ABS students. I'm trying to be fair because I think we need to compare apples to apples. So it's just asking one of our school board members to make sure I had the right data. We have, looks like 13,630 middle school and high school students. So this pilot will say is reaching 18% of secondary students. We are spending between the dedicated FTE and the amount allocated almost $1 million on this pilot. If you look at the amount allocated and divide it by, you said 500 cards distributed, that's $1,700 per card. Or it's, if all 2,400 students are involved, that's $366 per student. The math does not work out here. And so I'm going to maybe put an even sharper point on Ms. Garvey's comments and say, this definitely isn't working, right? Whatever the system is. And so I understand we're trying to collect data. I really respect that about both our staff and schools transportation staff, that when this does go to scale, we want to do it in a rigorous way. But that is a really high price to just be collecting data and not actually be doing what this pilot is all about, which is laying the groundwork to facilitate behavior change. I mean, the whole point is that we want students out of vehicles being driven either by themselves or their parents to schools and on to our art buses to, again, reduce emissions. And so this is a lot of money, and I'm sure that's not a fair way to look at it, right, divided by the number of cards distributed, because I'm sure we're paying for consulting support and data collection. But I've expressed to the manager that I'm really hoping by the time the fall comes around, we can be expanding this. And I'll just say for my part, a fair amount of disappointment there at how the math is working out on a pretty circumscribed effort.
If I could add one, just to pile on a little bit, don't take it badly. I mean, when I was getting the report, one of the things they're talking about is they're distributing the cards in the cafeteria. And students are coming up. Some of them don't know whether they can get them or not and aren't coming. And then some students are coming and asking for cards and told they can't have them because they don't qualify. And then when it comes to changing behavior, I kind of feel like every student that wants to ride an art bus, we'd love to have them on it. So, we're dumping a lot on you. I'm glad we are doing the pilot, and we better get some, we'll get some good information. But I think a really simple way to just get everybody using it would probably in the long run be better maybe, but we'll get there. We'll see where we
And
get.
now, I think our status quo is that students pay $1 in fare, right, when they show their student ID?
If they have an iRide card.
If the IRID,
Have an
yeah.
iRide card?
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't think we're even looking at that much foregone revenue if we expand the nature of it, so.
Simple would be really
Yeah.
good.
And we
Thank
could
you.
look
Sorry.
at simplification and
Which is a merits in itself. All right, thank you for that.
Before we leave this, I still am somewhat flummoxed as to why this pilot is as ineffective in delivery compared to options that are available currently. So for example, there's the smart benefits approach where you preload a card with a certain amount of dollars. You decide whether or not they roll over and what happens if they're not used. And WMATA, the agency that administers that, can refund the money. So I actually don't understand why this is as complex as it is, and we just didn't figure out a way to work with WMATA to modify that smart benefits approach for these students, give them out to everyone. There's no risk in terms of lost foregone revenue. You're not preloading anything. People who use it, you pay for it. It's the dollar difference between what they could ride at and what they'll. So help me understand why we're doing it as we're doing it, where we're unearthing the issues of why are we only reaching 17% of the students? Why is it so difficult to figure out who qualifies and who doesn't? And we have all of these issues that we're talking about now.
Okay, I'm going to actually, I feel like I'm a little bit out of my depth on some of the detailed questions you're asking. So I'm going to ask Dennis Leach to help me out. Dennis, if you could also join in. The other thing I would, in terms of our uptake and our participation, I would simply note before Dennis jumps on that we did an initial round of the rollout of the cards, right? You don't get everybody the first round. You're hoping for that behavioral change, right? So the kids talk to each other and hopefully more get it. And then we're taking a whole nother round through all those schools again this month. So to increase our uptake and pass out more cards. So we're not done by any means with initial distribution, but it's a process where the neo-niche team goes out there and does it. So we'll get more on board. How many over time is what we're trying to track. We're trying to get to that behavioral change. And as we said, we'll come back in the fall. But Dennis, hopefully you can come on camera if we get this technology right.
Yeah, so just a couple things. So we're at the very front end of the pilot. We have done an initial round in the 6 target schools that were selected with APS. So we have distributed about 500. We have a full set of schedules for March for all 6 schools. And we work collaboratively with APS on notifications, letting them know when our team will be there. We also help with trip planning, trying to line them up with what buses can actually get them to the school. And this really is intended to just be scaled up. We learn from this pilot, and we fully intend to provide a kind of end of spring report to the board, but also what I imagine will be a fairly significant restructuring and expansion of the program for the fall. So much of the funding really is for really the upcoming year, as opposed to this initial spring pilot. And again, we're in week 3. And if Lynn Rivers would like to add anything more.
Thank you, Dennis. The only thing I would just add to that is the reason why we structured the pilot the way we've done. First and foremost, to affect students that we know have transportation challenges. So we felt like this was the population that we could get the most information from with regards to their travel behavior. And secondly, because of the sheer fact of the capacity of the ART service, the number of vehicles that we have, the fact that we are going to be actually moving vehicles over the course of the pilots as well. So we wanted to have these pilots to be manageable so that we could get the information that we needed in order to grow it. As Dennis says, the whole point is to make this successful, the pilot successful, so that we can know how we will be moving into something that will be scaled up.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, just to what Lynn has just said, I think the transit team recognizes some of the cost implications that Mrs. Crystal's indicated, but there are already some ideas on how that might be scaled up, as Lynn said, and simplified in that, student passes, something of that nature that would not have such an iteration on loading of cards, et cetera. So there's some other ideas, and the transit team's already looking at that and reviewing that kind of option in the future, but it just seemed a little premature since we just launched it in February. But I think that's all something they're thinking about because they recognize this pilot methodology is strictly applicable for the pilot, and we'll have to do something a little more efficient if this is going to make sense over the long term. Thanks.
Thanks. Mr. Dorsey, did you want to follow up? No. Okay, thanks. Mr. DeFrenti, transportation.
Thank you. I mean, I guess I sort of associate that I might want to follow up with writing on that question that you guys both surfaced. My question is part comment, part question. Thrilled to see the Vision Zero position. And I'm not sure whether it's for you, Mr. Emanuel, or Mr. Leach, or who might drop down from the sky and help answer the question. But I had a conversation about, total number of vehicles through an intersection is super important as we keep people safe. So is the pattern of accidents. And so just wanted to sort of, I don't know if that's, I guess the question would be, is that a written policy that might come forward as to sort of, as we have Vision Zero resources, would we be able to do a little more of that analysis and research to say that we have, that we could look at accidents in addition to through traffic? And I don't know if that's for you or Mr. Leach.
I'll take that. I'll try to keep it at a high level. And this relates to a conversation I had with Wei Wang, our TEO bureau chief, who routinely briefs us on the Vision Zero program and the progress they're making. So the answer is yes. We look at both, all the volumes at the intersection, the vehicular, the pedestrian, and presumably the scooters and so forth, the bikes as well, and how those all interact in that intersection, and then the accident data and the type of accident. Right? What, is it vehicle? Is it vehicle pedestrian? What are the risks and so forth? And then when we look at traffic controls and different types of controls, particularly when people look at, the warrants for four-way stops, or they look at the warrants for a signal or a rapid flash beacon, look at the warrants and the numbers and the thresholds for those. One of the conversations we had with Hvac recently was, because some of these warrants are like, based on the number of accidents that occur, and before you say, yes, we met the warrant. And so part of our proactive thinking is like, well, how do we get upstream of that? How do we look at the data and the analysis without actually having the accident? There are other ways to look at this where we can, by the volume and the conflicts, draw enough parallels to where we can get ahead of the accidents. So that's the whole mindset of the team.
Yep.
And I think going in the direction that's the right approach for our community.
Thank you. That's helpful. I'm mindful of time. I just mostly, someday in the next 20 or so, learning how the Vision Zero person fits in with Way's team would help. I don't think that's a now, and that's an operational and management question, but how you anticipate that might work, I'll follow up on that.
Thanks so much. Any other questions on transportation?
I was
Mr. Kieran
covered on the pilot for the students. That's okay.
Thanks. All right.
One more, Madam Chair?
One more, please.
Yeah, just wanted to ask about the 16M as it's coming along. Very happy to see that finally within a near-term budget, which is terrific. Could you just provide a status update on some of the other approaches that we were hoping to have when this service was introduced, such as transit signal priority, other improvements to move the flow of buses through the Columbia Pike corridor? It's pretty nice now, but we're moving back towards pre-pandemic gridlock?
All right, great question, and we owed the board an update on the transit signal priority. We just sent a memo to the manager 2 days ago, was it, Mr. Schwartz, I think, and so we'll get you that information. I'll try to summarize verbally, kind of give you a quick preview. The analysis that we've done indicate that Lee Highway is our first priority, or number one choice for transit signal priority. And the west end of the pike would then follow behind that. We think that the west end of the pike makes sense because obviously it's nearing completion, it's got some stability, and the road form is there where it needs to be. Obviously, as we do the other segments on the pike, they're going to be under traffic disruption, and it probably doesn't make sense there. But we can certainly benefit from, hopefully, the west end where it's more normalized for at least that portion. So we'll get you some information. The team has done a great analysis. It shows the opportunity and reduction of time that is there with these different corridors based on the number of intersections, the patterns, and the nature of the traffic behavior.
All right,
so
thank you.
We'll get you some information, and it was just recently completed.
Thank you.
What's the target the target frequency for 16M? At peak?
Headways, you mean?
Yeah.
I don't know that off the top of my head. Dennis or Lynn, can you take that quick answer for the target?
Sure. So the 16M headway would be 6 minutes.
Throughout or on peak times?
I believe that was throughout the weekday.
Okay, great.
That's terrific to hear. It's a little overdue, but 6 minute headways that's a game changer for the bike. So
Yeah, 6
great.
minutes is my dream. Many students will like to write that.
There you go. What an excellent point.
Because among other things, it's also not who rides the buses, but where the buses are going. If they're going, some students are complaining to me, for example, that they have to change a couple of times, and there would be small adjustments that would be specifically for them.
That's great.
I can't help but think about our students coming from Columbia Pike who will be going to the new Arlington Community High School campus in Crystal City, Penn
Or
City.
communicate between Wakefield and the Career Center. If only 77 would get them a little bit closer.
There we go. All right, thank you. I'm going to flag, I just have a few questions. I'm putting them in writing now for follow-up, but to give a little bit of a heads up across departments. The Water Sewer Streets Bureau, the performance measures noted a really significant increase, I think if my math's right, about 25% in the asphalt maintenance cost per lane mile. And if you could just, again, in follow-up, share a little more about what's driving that. I assume related to inflation, maybe labor, materials, but that's a pretty big jump considering how many lane miles we are maintaining. So if I could get that as well as the total line item in the fiscal 23 budget for asphalt maintenance. There is, speaking of signal optimization, although that's about transit optimization that we were just talking about, but there's a big increase in the forecasted number of signals to be optimized this year. And so if I could get more of a sense about what this means for users of our streets, what improvements they'll see as a result. And then there are 2 FTE that we haven't talked about that are going to be within the sort of division of decision support and GIS. And I'm unclear what those employees will correlate with in terms of improved outcomes. The performance measures didn't indicate, in that section, didn't indicate big changes. So if you could help me understand a little bit about what having those 2 new FTE will mean, I'd appreciate it. But I can, unless there's anything you wanted to speak to now, I can send all that over and follow up.
I'll just give you a real quick one on the 2 people in decision support. We have one who does coding for us, apps for the operational units, and keeping those going and doing new ones. Anthony Taylor, he's an amazing young man who was an intern and worked his way up, and then that he wanted to stay with us and the work that we do. The other one is a GIS analyst and coder. And so both of them are young people that we'd like to keep on board and with our team. And Nicole Faruqi is also one who does dashboards for us. So that's the type of work that they do. And we'd just like to move them because right now their future is uncertain.
I see.
As limited term people that were started out as interns, and this gets them to a permanent status. We want a pipeline for success for intern people to then grow and continue to grow their skills with the organization if we can do that.
I'm really glad you shared that because it sounds like it's actually less about creating a new function and more about keeping a couple of people that could be the future of the division. And it sounds like actually maybe we can hope to see the impact of their work across DES and maybe across the enterprise rather than having it specifically change the performance measures within decision support. I'm sorry, Ms. Garvey.
No, I had a question on the exact same, and it's sort of a general question, which maybe there's not even a good answer for. Reading about the decision support in GIS section, I kept thinking, well, this is DTS. No, it's not. I kept thinking I was reading about DTS. So, and I'm wondering if I haven't been reading about it in the past or we're just describing it differently. Could you talk just a wee bit about how that office interacts with DTS? They've got to be close because they're doing, They're
very integrated. Jack and the DTS team and all the great people he has on his team provide kind of the backbone network for us. The security protocols and infrastructure and the architecture that we all fall under. The people that I'm talking about in decision support provide that operational support to the units, the innovation, the tools, basically the business
Okay, I've got
software.
it. The applied.
Yeah, the applications, the business applications.
Okay.
And the stuff for the people in the field and connecting the data and using the applications. So we have, and Claudia O'Connor is our decision support lead. And she and I were just talking about, we just hired a new technology guy, started this week to replace when she stepped up to the position. And we're talking about the enormous number of business systems that we have, business applications, and how we keep our arms around them, keep them current, keep them maintained, and what our strategy is going forward. Now that we've got her replacement hired, she can start focusing on that particular task. But the short story is they provide the backbone and all the infrastructure that enables everything, but our team is in the business applications, things that support the operational units, from solid waste to the water, sewer, streets, to the plant, to wherever it is.
Yeah, all right, fascinating. I mean, because it's good. I'm glad they're like that. Just was kind of curious. I had one other question on a totally other different issue. I don't know how we're doing on questions here.
We're going to give you the final one before we move into the funds.
Super quick, small. I mean, there's no priority order here. I was interested to read, I just need a little explanation on, it was on recycling. And you said that it was particularly good at the detention facility and parks. So what's happening with parks? Is this just that our park staff is really good about getting brush together? Or are you saying that our residents who go into our parks are really good about recycling when they're there? Do you see what I'm saying?
I will have to follow up on that question because I don't know the answer to that.
What's going on? Because if there's something going on with our people actually behaving better, it'd be good to know for helping out with recycling elsewhere. But that'll do me for now. Thank you. I'll be interested. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I want to make sure that we do leave a little bit of time. Mr. Manuel, is the plan for you to present on stormwater and utilities and auto, and then we'll ask questions on all three? Or do you want to
Yes,
stop? Okay,
all
that sounds
three.
great to me. Over to you.
I can go fast through that. All right. So these photos represent activities underway or coming soon on active construction projects. So on the top left there is Donaldson Road Trib B during construction. It shows a stable cascades and a completed section. On the top right, it's not happening yet, but it's what we can expect to see at Cardinal Elementary. We just talked with Jeff Chambers over in schools this morning. It's probably going to be like the April-May timeframe when we start to see that type of activity. On the bottom is an example of the litter control devices that will be installed at Ballston Pond. So this year we're proposing a static sanitary district tax of 1.7 cents. And as we stated last year, that's not there's no rate increase needed this year. The second MS4 permit was issued during calendar year 21, so now we have the next 5 years to reach our 40% total TMDL reduction or the additional 35%. As you heard in the work session right here on the February 1st, the stormwater utility implementation is beginning. And then our stormwater working group moved from study to implementation during the pandemic with the blended engineering strategy as part of our CIP last summer, moving to development of a draft flood resilient design manual as a tool for voluntary resilience. And then I talked briefly at one of the earlier slides about the flood sensors on the right-of-way at key intersections. That work required some really hard to get specialty contractors. And the footings were poured mid-February. And then we hope to finish those out by mid-April. So here's a quick recap of our stormwater budget. Our tax rate remains unchanged, so based on those increased assessments, revenues are also going up about 6%. Since it's a balanced fund where revenues and expenses have to match, we allocate the budget based on those revenues expected, and we then first have to fund the debt service, which is about $936,000. or 6%. Then we fund the O&M expenses, about $11.16 million, 70% of the revenues, and the remaining balance goes to capital pay-as-you-go. So keep in mind that capital pay-go doesn't include any anticipated bond funding for the capital program. That'll be highlighted with more detail during the upcoming CIP process. So the fund is proposed to increase by 3.5 staff this year. Next slide. So the funding is proposed in two very targeted areas. The stormwater utility implementation and administration adds some one-time and ongoing funding for FY23, as well as those 2.5 FTEs. The FTEs will include a GIS analyst, a billing technician, and a half FTE for public engagement communications. So additionally, to support the capital program, we're adding one civil engineer. That engineer will work on stormwater management and capital projects and stormwater and erosion control maintenance in public spaces for those projects that are across the departments. So with a particular emphasis on supporting the parks, because they have a lot of capital projects that need stormwater support as well. And a quick update regarding the stormwater utility for those not watching who may have missed, those now watching who may have missed the work session on the 1st of February. So today we've completed phase 1, which included the feasibility analysis led by our consultant that examined the impacts of moving to a stormwater utility. That deliverable included a comprehensive final report that's on the county's website. We also completed phase 2A, which was an add-on to the feasibility study. We looked at additional rate options, recommendations for billing, and credit program options. So now we're going into phase 2B, engagement and implementation phase. So again, there's a project page out there with all the project documentation, more information about the project, and the public can also view the 1 February work session on that project page. Moving on to the utility fund. So just a quick note on this slide. On the bottom left, that says kind of like, what is that? That doesn't look like a water thing. Well, that is a picture of the McMillan North Clearwell, where our water source provider, the Washington Aqueduct, plans to replace. That particular structure, design is getting underway to replace it. It was built in 1902. It's a significant investment by the aqueduct, and we are one of 3 partners of the aqueduct. So here's a nice snapshot of the utilities fund scope of maintenance, of infrastructure, and selected operations and maintenance. So the operating budget is increasing 2.6%, with an overall water sewer rate increase of 2.4%. Overall expenses increase about 2%, up to $108 million. Revenue's got to fund those expenses, so we have to increase the rates. Cost drivers this year are investment in the workforce, water purchase, overhead charges, and budget adds. One thing I did want to highlight about the transfer to PAYGO is that increased investment at the Washington Aqueduct for that resiliency of source water. They are undertaking a significantly increased 10-year capital plan. We'll provide more details during the CIP process. So the proposed budget does include additional funding on 3 targeted areas. The water service line material inventory, which will determine anything we need to update, including compliance with the new EPA rule. At the plant, we're adding one electric vehicle and charging infrastructure. It's basically a mobile workshop for the electric instrumentation shop. $45,000 for the van, $15K for the charging infrastructure. Utilities, of course, is part of the countywide initiative to upgrade to EVs. And so for utilities, there's 7 total vehicles, 4 at the plant, 3 at water sewer streets. 7 replacements total, 5 trucks, 2 vans. So whereas I talked earlier about the cars being about a little over 5,000 apiece, the delta for the bigger vehicles like this are significantly more. The delta for a truck is about 14,000 and a van about 26,000. As I mentioned earlier, the water sewer rate increases by 2.4%. This page kind of shows it nicely in a graphic way. It's a blended rate increase based on a number of factors. The large decrease in sewer debt service is then offset by increases for workforce investment, capital program funding, indirect overhead transfer to the general fund, and then the budget adds we talked about, and an increase in the water purchase rate. So while overall it's a 2.4% increase, customers are going to see varying impacts to their bills based on their household usage throughout the year because we now have a little more complex rate structure. Moving on to the auto fund. So year to year, the auto fund moves around depending on what's due for replacement and how much it costs. We are experiencing significant inflationary pressures for our heavy equipment. So for example, a medium dump truck is now costing us about $50,000 more than previously. A small bucket truck is about $12,000 more. The Equipment Bureau is working aggressively with the facility staff and the air team to meet the board's direction on replacing vehicles with EVs where feasible. So the graph on the right shows our projected progress over 22 and 23 on how we're converting our non-public safety fleet to electric. So by the end of 23, we estimate that over 35% of our sedans in this category will be electric. We've tried to compare, like, well, how are we doing relative to other communities? I asked this question to McBride, I think it was last week, and one data point is we're doing better than Berkeley. So, you know, we need to be proud of the efforts that we're making here and the effects of the board's direction on this and the commitment you're making with the funds. To accomplish it, we need that extra $275,000 in additional funds to pay for the incremental costs. Part of the board's direction was to report back to the board on what vehicles were not able to be replaced with electric. So in general, we didn't have a large number of vehicles purchased in FY22 due to the low mileage, deferring many of purchases. So we purchased a total of 13 electric vehicles in 22, and those that were not ordered as EVs included the following: 5 Ford Escape hybrids. We got hybrids instead of the EVs because there wasn't availability on the market for an affordable small electric SUVs. We're not buying BMWs at the BMW price. 8 pieces of large heavy equipment that simply don't have an electric option at all. And then 5 various trucks and vans that, due to a combination of lack of market availability and the unique departmental mission need. And I can provide additional details on those now, or I can get those to you in writing on those additional 5. So to wrap up for DS, as we look to the future, like many other departments, we're really seeing impacts of the competitive job market. It's resulted in hiring and retaining challenges at all levels in our workforce. Again, we want to thank the manager and the board for your pay increase proposal in the budget, which is so valuable. Pay compression, of course, is really difficult to address in our workforce, and we're supportive of the funding the manager has proposed there. We really have an incredible diversity of jobs by the nature of the job in the department. It goes from electronic instrument technicians to planners to engineers. So just a couple of points in the current market. We're challenged to just find CDL drivers. We're challenged to find qualified water, sewer, streets technicians, as well as trades manager leaders. Trades manager leaders, those people that lead the groups of crews. I mentioned earlier that we hired a great new technology applications manager who started this week, but that was after 3 rounds and other candidates who accepted and then turned us down. We're still on the hunt for a facilities design and construction bureau chief to replace June Locker, our former one. And through some of those interviews that I've been able to talk to some of the candidates, a common theme is you have really great work. I think I'm a great match for your team, but I can't take that much of a pay cut. That is a recurring theme we're hearing. So we still haven't reached the new normal for some of our services, like ACCS, transit, future programs. Those could all look different than they do today. Metro funding pressures in the future could impact local transit delivery and put more pressure on ART. There'll be more in a future work session. And as we continue to implement the CEP roadmap to guide our future energy investments, transform our community, and reach our 2050 goal. And of course, systematically, we're doing it both internally and externally. We're looking equity with our program delivery. So let's do the next round of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Emanuel. Okay, questions on either of these, any of these funds and functions? Mr. Dufresne, do you want to start?
Sure. On stormwater, I know we have more to go, but I think it's appropriate to say thank you for the progress that's been made. I don't have much in the way of questions on slide 41, where you talk about the vehicles that were not ordered as electric vehicles. I've never been so happy about a statement about what's not there as that, because it gives program integrity that you guys are working. And so just a big thank you on that. You said with respect to on slide 40, the graph with the sedans, I didn't quite hear you. You said we're doing better than others or better than most in the region. Is that, I always like to do better than everyone else in the
Specifically, I
region.
think the point was better than Berkeley, was that?
Yeah, better than Berkeley.
Well, that's even better. That's great. So I actually do have a question in here, and it's about the number of vacancies that you have. 872, I think, was the number of of authorized FTEs that you have. And I just, if you have a ballpark of how many vacancies, I know DHS, we have a lot of vacancies, and it might help to orient if you had a sense of that, or someone on your team where you could get back to us.
Yeah, we'll get back to you on that. I don't have a tip of tongue. It varies over time. I think we probably have a higher vacancy rate now, and we often face that challenging thing is like, do we keep trying, do we push for a reclassification? Because that takes time and bandwidth. It's also, those are some of the challenges we're facing. It's a tough market.
I have been wondering as to whether some flexibility, because of how difficult the market is with respect to compensation. This is a manager and you sort of a question, but I've been wondering that question because your experience with 3 rounds of looking for someone, I guess I would be more inclined towards even more discretion than in other circumstances. And I don't know if there's an idea there that we can pursue either with DES or the manager as a whole.
Yeah, we work with HR in a positive way when we're in those hiring moments, to exercise a reasonable amount of flexibility. Or sometimes it's a simple matter of, maybe we can throw something in depending on the level of the person. We could throw in a little leave time. You got to really understand the candidate, what their issue is. Sometimes it's, you can land them. We kick them over to our benefits. Amy Rozier does a great job of explaining the benefits and the true value of our benefits. And, sometimes that lands people, but sometimes it doesn't. And in certain areas, I think that people just take our offer and take it then on to the next thing. And, it's the market, they can do that.
Yeah.
So it's a combination of things. And it is challenging because you also don't want to make the wrong hire. Mm-hmm. And you also want to thank those people who are serving in acting roles, doing a tremendous job, right? Because they're doubling up their work or tripling up their work in the unit to make it happen. And you're like, because there's no perfect human being ever or perfect hire. And so you try to make those judgments. But you also don't want to make that decision to just choose someone you're like, this is not the right person, just so I fill the position. So it gets tough.
Yeah. Thank you for that earnest answer. And Mr. Dufresne, I'm really glad you raised that question. I think that's going to be a common theme for a few of our departments. We talked with public safety, particularly ACPD yesterday. I know this is a big challenge for DHS. And, I think generally the board has not gotten too into the weeds of HR decisions, but we are obviously in an economy where this is really challenging our ability to deliver the level of services that we expect. And the budget is always our lever. So often we think about it in terms of new positions, but when we have unfilled positions, oftentimes that's a bigger challenge. So thanks for answering it so honestly. I don't know that there's a silver bullet, but I think we get real insights from the decisions you're trying to make as a department lead. And we'll let you know if we have any brilliant ideas for levers we can pull in the budget to help with the great resignation that is hitting some of our departments so hard. Ms. Garvey, question.
Okay, sure. So this is on the street sweeping, residential street sweeping, and I know you don't have that. It's page 414. Just a question about you eliminated one of the sweeper trucks in 2020, and that's lowered the number of passes, and you still have a goal of doing more passes, but as I gather, you can't do it without that that truck back on order, but you're not asking for it. And I guess the question is why not? It does seem to me, as you stay in here, that the more we get stuff off the streets, the less gets swept into the bay and to everything else. So I was just kind of curious about what the thinking was there. I know you've been putting more on bike paths, which you talk about. And I also would be in that there's the figure of the sweeper material collected in tons. So there's a huge drop off when we lost that truck from 1,500 tons to 400, about 500 tons. So I'm just kind of curious about that, and you may want to answer that later. But that's just something that sort of jumped out at me, and I'm just wondering, is that persuade me that that's a wise thing to not do?
Well, what we found is, when you look at the tons collected, these good metrics, but they don't tell you the full story.
Yeah.
And what we were finding is that we were coming up empty on some of those extra passes, largely empty.
Okay.
And it's really tough. I mean, we have great citizens, but it is super hard to get them to understand and comply with when we're going to be sweeping on a residential street in particular. And so you're going around the vehicle.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
And you're not getting it, and then that vehicle is always parked there. And that was particularly true when there was more parking in neighborhoods during the pandemic, and that hasn't stopped either. There's more daytime parking, so our ability to get to curb is
So
harder.
that's why the amount collected went down,
Well-
because of all the cars on the street, not because we didn't have the truck to do it.
There's another factor that happens, and that's winter weather, which varies greatly.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so if there's not much snow and ice, and it's super mild, we're not throwing
Salt and
We're
sand.
not putting our blades down and creating the problem, if you will. And we're not throwing sand down, which we then have to sweep up later. So that all plays into it. There are winter differences as well. I don't know, Mr. Moon, do you have anything else to add that I haven't hit there?
No, the only thing I would add is that we did have there was some COVID, but I think the 2-mile winters too, with less chemicals and salt, was a big factor in what we collected. And I do think what we are increasing there, and we did reduce from 7 to 4, as you indicated, passes. And one of it was just the value added for those additional passes was looked at pretty closely.
Okay, I guess I'm sort of persuaded. So if you had that extra truck, the drop-off would still be pretty precipitous due to all of these other reasons with the weather and stuff, not because of the fact there wasn't a truck there to kind of go by and sweep it up. Okay.
And then I like to think positively. I like to think that as our pavement condition index improves, there's less aggregate falling out to be swept up.
Mm-hmm.
So that having the numbers come down doesn't mean that there's stuff going out into the bay. It's hopefully that there's just less there.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Karatonis.
Short question, it has to do with the water sewer and the storm management infrastructure that you're building. We have been talking about the cost pressure that we have from, on payroll and, trying to retain and bring in personnel, but there is also another pressure. This is the pressure on cost and construction cost for all this. I've been told many times that things are not looking great, and that concrete is more expensive. In general, contracting is more expensive. So what's the impact of this inflation on projects?
I actually thought about putting that on my get off the stage slide as another future consideration. But here's kind of where I landed. It's so uncertain we don't know. We know we're at least in the short term, in a construction inflationary situation. I literally talked with Jeff Chambers this morning on this specific topic about what are you going to do for your CIP inflation assumptions? What are you basing it on? And he's like, we haven't decided yet. We're talking with our financial people, and we're going to wait till a couple of our bids come in before we decide. And so we can take a similar approach, and we'll work with Maria Meredith and her team and figure out what makes sense. There may be an approach where we kind of assume a higher rate for a few years and then, assume it tapers out after that. Steel was up, now maybe steel is back down. It depends on the nature of the project and what you got going into it. The other thing I would tell you is that it, our ability to actually predict it when things are this dynamic is limited. So we're just going to have to swag it, adjust, iterate.
Okay, great, thank you.
To be continued, right? Okay. I think the only other question that I had, and then we might actually wrap up a little early this evening, but the slides about the take-up of the food scraps program were encouraging to hear. And I wanted to ask one of the questions about diversion, which also was a question raised for me as I was reviewing the curbside recycling tonnage, the trash tonnage, the organics tonnage, all under the Solid Waste Bureau's budget pages. 20% diverted to date, that is of food scraps that we knew to be in the trash stream, 20% have been diverted, or has 20% of our trash tonnage altogether been diverted?
I think I'm going to turn that over to Mr. Moon. I think you were engaging with Eric on that, or Katie?
Yeah, I think the 3,000 tons, I guess it's on page 413, that are shown on that curbside organic increase diversion. That is coming from different, the majority of it we think is coming from the trash, going from the trash container to the green cart. Yeah. But there is also there's some additional things that our Solid Waste Bureau is tracking where some of that could have been going down the drain. Some people, actually use that through the garbage disposal. There is some, and we don't want to think this, there could be a small element that we like the reuse principle with composting. Some could be coming there because it's more, they would feel better, some feel better about, it's going to be used in an organic recycling program. So some composting, but we don't really think that's material. I think the overall, there is an embedded increase in our trash projection on an annual basis of about 1%. Yeah. And so that it doesn't, if you look at the additionality of 3,000 tons in that, some of that is also coming from increased trash. So it's not, you don't see the 3,000 exactly reducing from the curbside trash tonnage, but it's.
What about the source of on slide 26? It said 20% diverted to date under the food scraps program. What is that figure?
Yeah, that's actually what they've projected being diverted from the trash.
But 20% of the food scraps that would otherwise end up in the trash? Not the 25% of trash overall has been diverted.
No, it's yes.
Yeah, I asked because I know and I think we're going to be revisiting this at some point with our planning this year. We have the zero waste goal, right? So I think it's interesting to know or to try to track to what extent the food scraps program is helping us reach that. It's certainly I would hope cause for optimism that you all are projecting that the trash tonnage will, as an absolute number, decrease in this upcoming year as our population grows. I think that's a good sign, and I know we're eventually trying to get it to zero. So that's great to see. And as a very satisfied customer of the food scraps program, I'm glad to see some number of Arlingtonians are joining me there too. So, okay, I think. Oh, Mr. Dorsey, I'm sorry.
I just had a question I was going to do in writing, but you asked, so I'll follow up.
Jump on it.
Wow. So on pages 411 and 412, I just want to make sure I'm understanding what's being presented in the performance measures. So we've got an overall recycling and diversion rate, which you calculated roughly 52%. Yet what's listed as a percent of waste recycled from county agencies at 45%. Are those the same calculations? And if so, what do we think the erosion in the county's waste recycled rate is compared to FY21?
Yeah, so one is the whole community, and then why is Arlington government agencies less than that? That's the question.
Well, the first part of the question was making sure that they were calculated in the same way, since in at least the language, they're written in a different way, which could impute that they are actually calculated differently. So if you could just tell me whether or not it's an apples to apples comparison. And then part two, why do we have a sense of why we've seen a degradation in that percentage rate since FY21?
Okay, we'll get back to you on that in writing.
In general, 21 seems like a super good recycling year. I mean, even the glass recycling numbers, et cetera, there's some tapering off.
All right. Well, thank you. I wonder if it has anything to do with everyone being home, maybe, versus in their workplaces?
We literally got that information from from Shani Kroljak this morning, that we think what's particularly in the residential stream, which is where we do most of our work, people were drinking at home, wine and beer or whatever with glass. And so now people are going back out to bars. So now it takes it out of our stream and into a commercial stream. So the glass has moved.
Which has always been a little bit of a challenge, right, with our recycling program, that it's increasing amounts of Arlington's life is being conducted in commercial buildings, right, whether that's residential that's technically classified as commercial, or, there we go. I'm going to wrap up, or?
Yeah, actually, I had a question. It's just a simple question. I'm not sure to whom I send questions from the budget. I've got a list that I want to send in by saying I'm going to send in by my email, and I realize I'm not
send them
sure.
over to Michelle Cowan, whether
Is it
she
Michelle,
wants them
as
or
per
not.
usual?
I don't know if there's anybody else we should be sending
Michelle,
them
you're
to.
the questions are, as per usual. Thank you.
Let us know if we should be sending them elsewhere.
Yeah, I didn't want to ask the wrong people.
Geopolitical events, the question guru. No czars.
Guru,
No czars.
okay. Oh, you're right. Good point. Oh, good point, sorry.
Czar-free diet.
Excellent point.
Okay, great. Thank you all so much. We appreciate it. I think we can take the level and detail and rigor of the questions as a sign of interest in everything that your department does. So thank you for spending so much time with us this afternoon. We'll look forward to following up. And I think, as noted earlier, a couple of the conversation points are going to be ones that we carry with us throughout the budget. They're big philosophical questions about the future of some of the most important work within DES. So we look forward to continuing that dialogue. And in the meantime, thank you. We are adjourned until next Tuesday, when we will gather again at 3 p.m. for a work session on community planning, housing and development, and human services.